Welcome to Relationship Equity, a podcast that explores how successful people cultivate meaningful connections with others in their personal and professional lives. Learn from the stories, insights, and advice of leaders, innovators, and influencers who have built strong bonds with their teams, their customers, their communities, and their families. Here's Richard Walker.
I'm excited to welcome Jeff Tollefson, the President and CEO of the Minnesota Technology Association, to our podcast. Jeff has over 25 years of experience driving tech sector growth and is going to share his unique career journey and the impact of key relationships. As the founder of Genesys Works, where I just served my second term on the board, he's transformed lives, and as a longtime friend, we'll explore his career progression and the role relationships played. Jeff, welcome to Relationship Equity. Looking forward to a great conversation with you today.
Well, thank you, my friend. It's good to be here, Richard, and what an honor to be able to be part of one of your first podcasts. So very cool.
So let's talk about the early part of your career. Before you founded Genesys Works, before you got into the role that you're in right now, you're in a very different world in terms of your career. Let's talk about that to start with why the venture capital world. You were heavily involved in startups, helped a lot of companies be the companies they are today, and then you switched gears. So let's talk about kind of your mindset and where it was to start with in the early part of your career and how that shifted, and I would say dramatically.
It's an interesting story of change, and it really came down to how did I value success in my life? Early on in my career, it was like many of us, it's how are we doing in our professional career? And the measuring stick is quite often, how much money are you making? And I had a point where, we had a great run with the venture capital firm that I had co-founded called Crescendo Ventures in the late 90s. But, that was also the dot-com era. Everybody was making money in the venture capital field. We were in the communications equipment and services sector, which was enjoying a great run. We raised over $1.1 billion in 4 different venture funds over the course of 5 years.
That was with a B, right?
That was with a B, yeah. It was one of those things, Richard, where luck would have it in our very first fund, which was quite small, $14 million. Our second investment was in an optical networking company called Ciena Corporation. And our $800,000 investment turned into $82 million that we were able to distribute to our limited partners. And of course, once people saw successes like that in the optical world, we were able to raise increasingly larger funds. And so that was going well. We went from just 2 of us to 45 employees in Minneapolis, Palo Alto, and London doing transatlantic venture. And then in 2001, the bottom dropped out of the communications industry. And we had a lot of bankruptcies for the larger carriers. And with those at the top of the food chain struggling financially, it only stood to reason that the small startups that we were supporting would suffer a worse fate. And they did. And so a lot of the paper gains that I would look at in terms of my carried interest, what it was going to be valued at one point, I remember just kind of mapping it out, and I'd gone from like 0 to $65 million worth of net worth on paper in just 2 years. And all of that dried up within a few years' time.
Wow.
And then it was trying to apologize to our limited partners of why we didn't see the downturn coming, trying to do triage of what companies do we keep afloat, which ones do we put more money into, which ones do we close down. And it was a difficult time in the industry. I was spending a lot of time on my work life. And because my work life was consuming me, I wasn't paying attention as much on the family life. So within a couple of years, our business prospects had really diminished in terms of about raising another fund. I ended up going through a divorce, which was a humbling experience. And I found myself really questioning, Richard, of what is my purpose in life?
Right.
everything that I was pursuing professionally had kind of fallen apart. My personal life wasn't where I wanted it to be. I was 45 years old, feeling like I'd kind of hit rock bottom, but oddly energized about what are some of the prospects and what can I be doing differently in the future. And I started thinking about not just what could I do with the rest of my life, but maybe more importantly, what should I do? Something that is more about significance and service to others, as opposed to just, fulfilling my own selfish professional opportunities. And so I ended up coming across an organization called Social Venture Partners. It kind of opened my eyes on how the business acumen and relationships that I had developed could be used for the social sector and for social impact and social good. And I can kind of go on for the rest of the story through Genesys.
Keep going. It's a poetic story. I mean, you had an epiphany, I would say, where you made a conscious decision. I am going to shift my focus in terms of what I deem to be success in my own world. Earlier in your career, as you mentioned, that most of us think of success in terms of how much money are we making. And of course, we've all got to put bread on the table and have the lives that we want. But I think most of us get to a point where we realize that's not the most important thing. And so you had an epiphany. My guess is when things were going really well and you're riding high in the market and helping companies do really well you didn't prepare for the massive crash that was going to happen and what that did to you emotionally. Can you talk about that a little bit with what happened? Because it happens to a lot of us. You don't see it coming.
It was very humbling because my whole identity had gotten wrapped around of how I was doing in my professional career. Right. And when that was not going well, and then not having, the personal life that I had, really aspired to see being successful, it was a tough time. But it also opened my eyes to the opportunity to do something differently. And it was during that time, Richard, that I had a friend of mine send me an essay. It was by a guy named Michael Josephson called What Will Matter? And it all is around what will matter at the end of our days, at the end of our lives. And it's not going to be about how much money we made, the careers we built, the cars we drove, or the houses we lived in. It's who's going to remember us when we're gone, for what and for why. Whose lives have we impacted and touched? And it kind of ends with living a life that matters isn't, by circumstance, it's by choice. Choose to live a life that matters. And I remember how it stuck with me because it almost gave me the permission I was looking for to try something completely different. It was out of the financial professional world and maybe really getting more engaged in the nonprofit sector. And it was a couple weeks later that I met a guy from Houston, Texas named Rafael Alvarez. And he had started a program in Houston called Genesys Works. I was really drawn to two things. One, he was helping high school students from economically disadvantaged backgrounds access careers in technology through a senior year internship. So it was really connecting motivation with opportunity. I also like the fact that as a nonprofit, it really was a social enterprise. It was like an IT staffing company. You just happened to be using, high school students as your trained resource, contracting them to work in the IT departments of larger companies. And that experience was just life-changing. And the reason I guess I like this social enterprise element is we didn't have to simply rely on charitable contributions. We could run it as a business. And I remember, Richard, by our 5th year of starting Genesys Works in St. Paul, and we'll come back to that, 93% of our operating budget came from earned income from services we provided, only 7% from philanthropic support. And at a time when we're trying to help these students reach economic independence in their lives, the fact that we as an organization could do that ourselves just was a double win in my book.
Well, in the non-profit world, that's rare as well, because most non-profits rely on donations and companies supporting them.
Yeah.
So that business model obviously intrigued you. Now, that's all well and good, but you still have to have corporate partners or call them clients, whatever.
We did.
Say,
and so when I asked Raphael, hey, if you want to replicate what you've done, can we try to do that in the Twin Cities? And Raphael and the Genesys Works organization said, absolutely. So on January 1st, 2008, I started writing a business plan for what this might look like. And I remember, and I'd never done a nonprofit.
Hang on a second. I got that date. I'm trying to wrap my head around when the market crash actually started. You started writing the business plan right at the beginning of the market crash.
Well, yeah, this is the beginning of, the Great Recession was kicking in. The tech wreck was 2001. Now, this was much later, not knowing we were going to be entering a recession, which kind of became a tough part, too, to the story, but yet we somehow persevered. But I ended up recruiting students from 3 high schools in St. Paul, Harding, Humboldt, and Highland Park. We got 7 corporate partners that first year: Ecolab, 3M, Bremer Bank, Land O'Lakes, and we were off and going with 14 students.
Now, I want to shelve that because I want to get back to that, and I want to talk about how you made that happen and the nitty-gritty in terms of relationships, because it starts there. But I want to shelve that and go back to something else that you said that I think is very important, because I think a lot of people go through the same thing in the course of their career and lives. And you said you gave yourself permission. Now, what did you mean by that? You gave yourself permission to do something completely different.
Yeah, I guess what I meant by that, Richard, is that my family and friend group, the neighbors, they had seen me being a business professional. It was just assumed that was what I was going to continue to do. Right. And to step away from that whole success circle of professionalism, it was a hard choice to make, to step away from it, because I never knew if I could ever come back to it.
Right.
And so I knew I had to go all in and be willing to go all in. And it was hard at first. But once I started spending some time with these young people whose lives that I realized they were depending on me,
yep,
as much as I was depending on them, that I was not going to fail. There was just all of a sudden a fire lit in me, and a newfound spark and enthusiasm for life that I had been missing in those prior years. And that this was just a new pathway for me. And did I give myself permission to do something completely different? Yes. One might say it was out of need, that I needed this for myself,
right,
to be able to do something of significance.
Was one of the reasons that you were, you didn't say that you were concerned, but I'll make an assumption that you had a concern of making this massive shift in your career. Were you a bit worried about how you might be viewed by your current peer group, people that you know, relationships that you have? Were you fearful of being judged?
I was absolutely fearful of being judged. And in retrospect, I never should have, because I had so many people saying, bravo, Jeff. I mean, I'm so happy you're doing that. How can I help? How can I be supportive? So I leveraged the professional networks that I had built in the business world and was able to bring that to bear to really help build and start this nonprofit organization. And that continued on. And the fact that I was able to get a couple of chief information officers of large companies to early on raise their hand and say, we're going to support this. How can I help? It was amazing to see their relationship networks, all of a sudden kick into high gear. And, that whole flywheel started spinning and built a lot of momentum in a short period of time. But it also took people like you, Richard, willing to invest your brand in support of this organization. And without individuals like you and the York Solutions organization, Genesys Works wouldn't be the impactful nonprofit it is today.
So you were the lone nut. I mean, a lot of people have seen the little skit on the side of a mountain at a concert in California, where
doing the dance.
he rips off his shirt and starts dancing, right? And all of a sudden, there's a massive, everybody's got their shirt off, they're dancing. And the moral to that story is, if it's just you, the long nut, and nobody follows you, you're the long nut. But the first follower, and then the other followers that come along, those are the ones, but it takes that lone nut, which you gave yourself permission to be the lone nut. And so many people are fearful of doing that. So it's incredible what you did, but I want to talk a little bit more about how you got it going, because you make it sound easy. We both know it wasn't easy. If you start anything from scratch and with the intention of building something, it's the most difficult thing we can do in business, in life, because you have to create that first follower, you have to create the followers. How did you go about doing that? Think about your first meetings that you had with these CIOs, and you're socializing this idea with them. Hey, guess what, Mr. CIO of a big company? How about you bring in some interns from the underserved community and I'll charge you for them? That's not an easy sell.
It wasn't an easy sale. And I think what helped is we positioned it as a contractor relationship, that if you're not happy with the services being provided, let us know and we'll move the resource the next day. So it wasn't they were hiring anybody. The fact it was a contractor helped de-risk the situation. And I think I also played up on, kind of the concept of who gave you your first chance? And do you want to now be remembered as that individual that opened a door of opportunity for a young life that they will always remember? And so you have to play a little bit of the head with the heart, help people see themselves in a position of helping create positive change in our community.
Yep.
And I think the fact that this was a new concept also was helpful, that people were willing to give it a chance because they could see the potential. And all I was asking is give it a year. And if you're not finding value, I'm not going to ask for you to ever renew. I think the scariest part of that year, Richard, though, was after training students and having them available to go to work in August of 2008. That is when the whole financial meltdown and the beginning of the recession had started. And so budgets were changing, and that continued on into 2009. And so we had to kind of pivot. And I remember going to Mike Hedges at Medtronic, and he was having to let go of a lot of his team members and was being asked to do more with less. And I said, Mike, what if you provided a halftime resource that could come in the afternoon, do some of the busy work, the more mundane tasks that can free up your full-time staff for higher and better uses of their time? What could that do for you? And so we had to position it differently at a time when staffs were being cut. And those were a lot of interesting conversations and good lessons learned.
Well, no doubt. And Mike, you couldn't have been working with a better person at the time, because you talk about making it real with people and the emotional connection to the mission and why we do what we do. I mean, Hedges, I first met Hedges on the golf course. He's a coal miner. He came from very humble beginnings in Northern England, as did I. So obviously we hit it off very, very quickly. But people like Mike, and he wasn't the only one, of course, embraced the concept, even though the times are really tough then. So you started this thing in the worst possible time and got through it, and then it skyrocketed from there, and it's continued, and the mission has continued. And now, of course, Genesys Works is spreading nationally. We've got 5 offices now, more to come. So I, as I'd mentioned, I've just finished my second term on the board, but you were the one responsible for bringing me in. So I can't thank you enough for bringing me in. But let's move gears here slightly. It's a little thing that we didn't really dwell on, but one of the big reasons you were able to get it off the ground quickly is because of the professional network you'd already created for yourself. You talk with people and they introduce you to others, and then you get in front of the right people that ultimately say yes. That's not an easy thing to do. And, we talk about the importance of developing relationships and developing your network, and it doesn't come natural to a lot of people. To you, it's part of your DNA. It's who you are. You're an evangelist. You're able to influence people in a positive way very, very easily because you're extremely passionate. You have conviction around anything that you represent, and people buy into that, as they should. That's all well and good. What about those that don't have those natural skills? What about those that so many people that we've both worked with over the years, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for. Highly, highly technical, brilliant brains, but networking and relationship development does not come naturally to them. What do you say to that? Is that just the way it is, or can that be changed?
Yeah, it's some are naturally have an affinity for wanting to build relationships, and and for others, it takes more of an investment of time and effort. But it doesn't mean you still shouldn't be doing it, even baby steps, because you don't ever know. And this is one of the things you highlight in your book, Richard, I think so eloquently, is relationship building doesn't always come with an immediate dividend or an immediate return on that investment of time and effort. You often have to give very unselfishly of your time and build, knowing that in time it's going to pay off. And for those that aren't natural relationship builders, I think there's ways that you can do it in a different way. You've used the golf course as a way to build relationships. Find that point of connection with somebody. Maybe maybe it's Minecraft or craft beer, whatever that can connect you with somebody else that can become a common point of interest that can allow conversations to start from. I think is great. The way you dress, Richard, is part of your brain. It's a conversation starter. The crazy socks that you give out. There are things that can be used as a tool to become a conversation starter. And somebody's going to ask, Richard, cool socks. Tell me more about those. And then all of a sudden you've built the conversation.
A conversation starter. I like that. Let me tell you a very quick short story, Jeff. It was really fun. This is only about a month ago. Maybe a little bit longer. It was back in the Twin Cities. And I was asked by a local CIO of the Twin Cities to meet with him. I'd never met with him before. And it was referred to me, and he wanted to meet for a few different reasons. And we sat outside at a coffee shop, and it was a nice day. So I've obviously got to be back in the summer because it was a nice day. And a gentleman, young fella, walked out to the coffee shop and walked past us, and it was dressed very nicely. And I pointed it out. What? I love that suit. And he turned around and he said something back. Oh, that's very nice. I said, you got to be interviewing, man. You're looking really good. And he said, actually, no, I'm in town from California for a conference. And I just had a quick chat with him, just a conversation. It was nothing of a conversation, but just two people never met before. And I pointed something out and we engaged in a conversation. And the CIO I'd never met before literally just sat down with him and hadn't even, just basically just barely shaking his hand. And I said, so I won't mention his name. I said, happy to meet you. What can I do to help? And he very quickly responded and said, I need to learn how to do that. To do what? To engage with somebody like that very quickly and start a conversation. And he slapped me in the face with, that doesn't come natural to some people. In fact, it probably is very unnatural to start a conversation with an absolute stranger. So my question of how do you start, I couldn't agree more with your point. Start small. Sometimes going to these big events to network is not the right thing. It's overwhelming. And if you do that, then start small and point out somebody's socks or somebody's suit, but it's got to be authentic and engage in a conversation. That's the key, right?
Yeah, and not being afraid to maybe embarrass yourself a little bit a few times by
absolutely
taking a shot and missing. But that old Wayne Gretzky quote of he never missed a shot he didn't take.
Exactly right.
You've got to sometimes take the shot. And serendipity is a wonderful thing, and you never know when that's all going to come together in really a great way, where you've made the connection, it leads to something big, and then I'm a huge believer in the networking multiplier effect.
100%.
You add another node to your network, and it multiplies further. And I have seen so many times of how one relationship that is impactful creates so much else. When I first met you over breakfast at Good Day Cafe,
Yep.
I remember hearing your background as a bricklayer and growing up not knowing what opportunities were available to you. And I could tell right away that the mission of Genesys Works resonated personally with you because it was your story as well as those that helped open doors of opportunity for you and supported you in your journey. And I could tell right away that you were going to be somebody that truly believed in this program and was going to help it. But oh my God, I had no idea the impact you ultimately would have. The millions of dollars that you raised, the relationships with other leaders, your continual elevation of the program in our technology community. And so when I look at the multiplier effect of Richard Walker to Genesys Works in the Twin Cities, it was huge. And it started with a simple breakfast. And who would have thought, where it would have gone from there?
Well, in building on your observation, the impact of networking multiplies when you genuinely believe in what you're amplifying. Let's just pause for a second here, Jeff. In our next episode of Relationship Equity, I'll be discussing the significance of building your network with my good friend, Jeff Tollefson.
Nurturing and maintaining relationships takes work. It takes work. And it takes being intentional sometimes. And I know I fail on that quite often. I look at some friendships that I wish that I had more time for. Similarly with business relationships, I'm getting LinkedIn requests all the time from people. And you've got to be really judicious of what your network looks like.
This has been Relationship Equity. If you want to take your career, your business, or your personal relationships to the next level, reach out to Richard at yorksolutions.net. You can also get Richard's book, Relationship Equity, your cornerstone investment to great gains in business and life, on Amazon now. Relationship Equity with Richard Walker is a production of Forbes Books.